Welcome to Canoeing Live. My name is Jim Olver, and a special welcome to everyone here tonight. And thank you very much for all you folks that are here for the second time. Canoeing Live is a virtual event series produced by Devin Ingram. Thomas Olver, our son, is a technical whiz that helps us get through a lot of these things, and myself, and it's aimed at sharing canoeing stories, building a community, and having guest speakers. Just getting my meeting notes opened. Maybe I'm doing more than that. Hold on, please. Okay. So a big thing for us here on Canoeing Live is we're striving for interaction. And this isn't just going to be a webinar. And you've noticed that we've got a little social few minutes as people are checking in. We did that for the first time tonight. We're using the chat. 2 weeks ago, people really liked the chat interaction, and we're continuing with that. We're going to do polling as a new thing tonight. Questions and answers. We're going to share audience photographs. And as always, we're going to communicate between shows using social media. But this new thing we're doing tonight is enter full screen. Does that make it better? We're going to do polling. And so we've organized a few questions, and we'd like you to answer those questions so we can find out a little bit more about who's watching. So you now have a poll in front of you, and you can check for how long you've been canoeing. Go right ahead and start that. What interests you about canoeing? And that's a multiple choice. Is that working? No, they're starting to get some action there. Oh, yes. So just take your time and answer those questions. This is part of the participation. I'm going to answer it on my other computer. What types of interest do you have in canoeing? I know Dev likes portaging. He'll be certain to check that. And the skill testing question, how many canoes do you own? Okay. We're going to give you another 10 seconds here. Here comes someone else in. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to end the poll. And now I'm going to share the results. So the results of the poll are coming right up. And if you're interested, and I'm certainly interested, I'm going to take a photograph of the screen, because once this goes through, it gets lost for a while, although I can download the information. And notice there's a slider there, so you can slide down and get all 3 questions. Do you notice any trends there, Dev?
Well, it looks like our group has been paddling for a long time. We have 10 people responding more than 20 years of canoeing. And it seems to be very popular activity to canoe trip and to tandem paddle with our group, but also lots of people solo paddling too. And most people, it seems, owns between 2 to 5 canoes, but lots of people own 1, and a few own none too, which is interesting.
Wow, I bet they'll own canoes before long. Anyway, thank you very much for participating in that poll. We're just going to take it off the screen now and move ahead here. So tonight our special speaker is going to talk about conservation from a canoe. You don't even have to be a biologist, she says. Conservation from a canoe. And I just wanted to use the chat and ask each of you, have you heard of Leave No Trace? And if you have, what parts of Leave No Trace do you practice while canoe tripping, or even camping if you don't canoe trip? So why don't you just take a minute and put that into the chat? We'll see what the highlights are, and I'm sure Tina will be fascinated to see what happens here. Everything you bring in should go out. Yes, take everything, including picking up after your dog. Well, we do that right here in town too. Leave it cleaner than we found it. Very nice, Stephen, and welcome, Steve. Tina, you're minimize campfire impact. Good one. Of course, leave no garbage. Very good. But thanks for that. I try not to trample vegetation. Good. Barrier poop. Thank you, Tina. We want to, people have been asking for more details about that. So we're looking forward to your talk. Gray water in the fire. Respecting wildlife. Thank you, Jim. All right. Well, it's sort of got us warmed up for our feature presentation, and it's my pleasure to introduce Tina Marika Barzo Guy. Tina has lived in the Bow Valley for more than 15 years. She's an avid paddler and has a passion for the environment. Tina is an active and long-term member of the Bow Waters Canoeing Club, and she's also a leading force behind the Facebook group of 7,500 women who paddle. Now that's a force. In her career with Parks Canada, she has gained extensive knowledge about the topics she will share tonight. And there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. Please, if you get a question as Tina's talking, you can put it in the chat. Dev is going to be monitoring the chat and summarizing the questions there. And we've got a nice sized group for asking questions verbally at the end of the session. So speaking on the topic of conservation from a canoe, I am delighted to introduce Tina Marika Barzo Guy. And we're just going to take,
Jim.
You're very welcome, and just take a moment to do that screen share.
Yes, so I'm just going to start my slideshow and switch my screens.
Looks
and
good
then
now.
Can you confirm that it does look good now?
Oh, no, do that click.
Okay. So one thing I just wanted to say is, can you hear me? And can you see the big white slide? Oh,
yes, we can.
Is that a yes? Excellent. Okay, thanks, Jim, for having me here to share a combination of my two biggest passions, which are canoeing and conservation. So I'll cover three main topics, as we've heard of: river-based leave no trace. And I'll talk a little bit more about clean, drain, and dry. And then I'll talk about citizen science. The first topic will take a bit longer. The other two I'll go through faster. So as Jim said, we hope you will interact in the chat, put your questions in there, also answer the questions I might pose to you. And it's good to keep in mind that the examples I'm giving are both from my work and my personal life, as well as my beautiful location here in the majestic Canadian Rockies. And all of these ideas are things that you can for sure use or apply wherever you paddle, if you live or travel and you paddle. So moving right into Leave No Trace, this is the 7 principles of Leave No Trace, and I want you to memorize them right now as I talk. So in 2008, I participated in a river-based Leave No Trace Master Educator course on the North Saskatchewan River in Alberta. We paddled from Nordegg to Horberg and camped along the way. We had a great group, including Priscilla Haskin from Haskin Canoe, who organized the course, and Mark Lund. Of course, he's a canoe legend in Alberta and beyond. We also had Mike Hornbala, who is a high school teacher and takes his students canoeing and teaches Leave No Trace. As you can tell, I was in really good company. I will demonstrate the principles through the photos of this trip. A few quick words on Leave No Trace comes first though. So Leave No Trace is a program that started in the United States in the 1980s, and Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics was incorporated in 1994 as a response to increasing environmental impacts of outdoor recreation, which I think we're seeing again, a big surge of that. Now there are chapters in other countries, including Canada. So there is a Leave No Trace Canada that you can look up. The principles always stay the same. So for instance, as in plan ahead and prepare, that is always communicated in the same way. But what can change and what is flexible, depending on the ecosystem, the audience, the context, or the activity, is how they can be adapted to focus on the specific ecosystem. So what they do focus on mainly is human-powered outdoor recreation. Leave No Trace is a science-based platform, so both environmental science and social science. And when you combine those two, it's a very powerful, effective way to minimize impact on the environment. And if you want to look up all the science, it's on their website at lnt.org. So one important difference to note is what are rules versus what are ethics. So we're more probably familiar with the rules, which are regulations that you have to comply to, or you may get a fine. Whereas ethics are education and inspiration. Another way to think of it is that rules are what you do when someone is watching, versus ethics are what you do when no one is watching. Leave No Trace also keeps evolving. So you've probably heard the motto of take only photos, leave only footprints. But with the viral nature of the Instagram shot and how it can inspire others to trample to the same spot at the same time sometimes, but also for the same shot, they have put messaging out around responsible photo taking and sharing as well. So as you can tell, Leave No Trace is really on top of this stuff. So this photo represents us getting on the river, and it kind of represents the first principle, which is plan ahead and prepare. But first things first, I want to point out, conserve energy. So on the far left-hand side is Mark Lund sitting while everybody else gets ready and going. So I just want to make a note, this is kind of a theme in this trip with Mark. So seriously, the main point is to know where you're going beyond safety considerations. So really do your research about rules and regulations, like who are the landowners who you may need permission from. Be sure to take inventory of your gear, make sure it's all working well and your trip will run smoothly. Because when your trip runs smoothly, of course, it makes it easier to implement more Leave No Trace principles. This photo represents principle number 2, which is travel and camp and paddle, I've added that one, on durable surfaces. And actually, you might be surprised to know that water is pretty durable as far as a surface goes. You don't leave a trail, which is kind of nice, but there are other special considerations. So such as access points and what we call riparian zones. That's the transition zone between like water and land. And in those transition zones are a lot of biodiversity, and it can be a really sensitive place. So being aware and being more careful in those areas. So, you know, actually trying to park your watercraft on durable surfaces anytime you stop is really recommended. So, you know, a break spot, a lunch spot, try to find those spots where when you leave again, nobody will know that you've been there. This is also a travel and camp on durable surfaces. Depending on the type of camping, of course, it can be a challenge to find a spot where you won't impact vegetation. Another thing that can be a part of your plan ahead and prepare is if you're going in a group, you can discuss how many tents you have and look into the type of camping you will have access to, and you can plan accordingly. Maybe you double up and you take less tents. Maybe not in the time of COVID. So does anybody know what principle this photo could represent? And if you do, put it in the chat. And it's a bit of a trick question because it actually can be two. And it represents, one is dispose of waste properly, because if you look, there's cans and paper and different litter in there. And then the other one is minimize campfire impacts. Okay, of course, this is why you want to look at it like there's a lot of these fire rings that are informal along the way of a lot of river trips. So it's either the illegal or informal fire ring. We actually often dismantle fire rings and try to make it look like no one has had a fire there so that we can discourage others from having fires. Fire rings can be problematic because if the fire isn't put out completely, you could of course start a wildfire. And if that's not a big issue, I don't know what is in our area, but other areas as well. And then of course, just leaving that fire scar there. I mean, it takes so long to actually, come back from that. So it can also impact wildlife. So like this little toad, if it hopped through the ashes, you can imagine how that would go for the toad. Leave no tracers tend to think about all of the little plants and creatures, not just the big wildlife that we want to respect. And if you aren't careful, Mark Lund comes out of the forest with an axe and a saw to teach you a lesson. Haha. So anyways, that's just another reason to leave no trace. He was quite a joker on our trip, as I learned. So in the chat, state which principle you think this is. And of course, this is where you would go to the bathroom, usually for sure number 2. And it's also known as the thunder box in a lot of campsites. So yes, it's dispose of waste properly. So how you might do this will depend on the ecosystem. For instance, on many river trips, there are these types of toilets, or even more basic, or there's outhouses that you would use in campsites. But of course, what do you do in between campsites? Well, you need to ensure that you dig a hole and bury your human waste at least 20 meters away from a water body. In narrow riverways, they recommend carrying out solid human waste. So just not to be too graphic, but I have used dog, poo bags before and like put 5 layers on. And, that's how one way you could, if you had to, you could carry out your human waste. When I paddled the Nahanni and the Wind Rivers a few years ago, our group dug a latrine in our campsite that was big enough for the group. We had debates on what size and shape it should be based on female and male, which was hilarious. But we actually would pack out our toilet paper, and at specific times we would burn that. So that's another way to deal with it. Ideally, you bury human waste in soil that's rich enough with healthy bacteria that it breaks it all down really quickly. And of course, a hot tip is try to mark it with a cross of 2 distinct sticks, so others will know that that's where human waste is buried. And now you know what to look for and not dig into. Of course, what do you do with number 1, as in pee? It's important to be aware of where you are peeing as well, because you might discover that there's something you want to eat right there. These wild strawberries that we have up here are just packed with flavor, and I recommend you do try one if you have the chance. But it's also good to leave them for wildlife. They probably need them more than we do. So that's another principle, is leave what you find. Leave what you find is also about leaving artifacts that you might discover. And even though it is tempting to take them home with you and display them on your favorite place as a memory, this is not a good idea. It is better to take a photo or enter a drawing into your nature journal or do a rubbing so as to have a good memory, but not to actually take the object with you. In most designated parks, it is illegal for you to take any kind of natural object as well. But be particularly responsible with artifacts and fossils wherever you go. The main thing is, remember, it may seem like you are just taking one item, But think about if everybody did that, there would be more impact, and over time, possibly there would be nothing left. So we do recommend that you leave what you find, and we did. And now the next visitors can have the fun of discovering the same thing that we did. Okay, so this is just another way to look at minimizing campfire impacts. So this is a campsite with a designated fire pit where the impact can really be concentrated and away from trees and roots like this one. And you see the river beyond. I mean, it's tempting to go out and have a fire by the river, but actually this is quite inviting, especially for a larger group with the rustic seating available. Or you can choose even not to have a fire and light some candles and look at the stars. And of course, hold hands. Okay, so, put in the chat what you think this photo represents in terms of which principle. And I'm moving quickly, so I'll give you a chance, but I want to talk about respect wildlife. So principle number 6. And I extend this to the smallest creatures too, like this anthill. It's fascinating. It's like an iceberg. Only a small amount is showing above the ground. 90% is hidden. So respect means just leaving it. Don't kick it apart. Don't disturb it. Don't pour things down the ant hole to see what the ants will do. They are doing an important job for the ecosystem. And like other wildlife, they have just like a finite amount of energy and they do not need the extra stress. I mean, we know what that's like. We don't need that either. So just think of it like that. Respect wildlife, in my humble opinion, extends to the plants and insects. It's all part of the community of life. So don't pick the flowers. Instead, take photos, draw them, but let them live. Plus, once you pull them from the earth, invasive species move in, which we'll talk about in the next section of the presentation. Another example of an informal fire ring, that's not even a full ring, but of course, you can see the impact on the vegetation there. It's going to be a long time before these plants can come back. It's a short growing season. So it's good not to have 5 of these on an island, for instance. So if you do see them, try to disassemble the fire rings and make it look like there was nothing ever there. But that is quite hard. This is a good example of an alternative. So a camping kettle wood stove is a fire that can minimize impact. It uses less wood. It still gives a nice smoky smell and flavor, and it can sting you in the eye because of the smoke. But it will boil water for tea and food super fast. So it's perfect when it comes to things and like multi-use things, which are really fun. Here's another example of an alternative to a conventional campfire. It's a fire box that folds flat and has the ability to cook. And meanwhile, you can also enjoy the flames. So on this trip, I mean, we spent a lot of time in circle, debating the principles and teaching each other with various games and activities, all while we were doing this trip. And all of this is available on the Leave No Trace website. You can purchase, or some are available for free, and get involved in learning more. Every trip you make, you will get excited about building on what you have as far as knowledge and your habits. We were so excited and having so much fun that we often forgot to take off our life jackets. Of course, it was fine because we were often paddling down this beautiful river and just enchanted and inspired by the scenery. There's some evidence that Mark does paddle. And if Mark is on this, I have to apologize because, sorry, but you did make yourself a good part of this trip. And here's my solo boat. It's the Belle Wildfire, 14-foot solo boat, perfect for tripping and a bit of whitewater. My first and true love. This is another example of a camp spot where I think it was really conducive for the training sessions, and along with the camping, it was set up for a good amount of serious studying and serious eating. The first part of the trip, we were accessing official campsites, but one night we chose to stay in a pristine location so that we could really practice Leave No Trace. And that's when the serious studying began. Of course, Mark was the best at that. And then we had, of course, Mike breaking it up a little bit with some lighter things and jokes. And all the while we were being watched. You always feel like there's some eyes in the trees watching. Of course, after the studying and the food were done, we could enjoy the fire. And this one is set on foil and on top of sand. And when it's done, you know what? No one knows there was a fire there. Ah, there's Mark taking a well-deserved break, conserving energy again. Oh, and there's Mike with his specialty move. So I think he's trying to grab a river snake here, which we call river snakes because they're everywhere and usually come up and grab your paddle when you least expect it, like when you're doing a crossbow draw. You usually end up in the water. I think he survived that one though. Oh, another glory shot. Sorry, I got to get my canoe in there. And of course, you can tell I'm just so happy when I'm paddling. Because aren't we all? Okay, so we did stay at this pristine location. And I have a very small tent, but as small as it is, I was not happy about putting it on these pretty little plants. Again, the point of this is trying to see the real impacts of camping in a pristine location. So we were just there for one night. There's my tent. And there's, where you can really see the little plants have been trampled down after just one night. So I packed up and I tried fluffing up the plants, a little bit just to give them a chance to thrive again. But you can really see the impact. And when you think about it, if other paddlers stop and they see that, they think, oh, this is a great place to camp. No one else will camp here too. That's going to create more impact. So as usual for canoe trips, we had some amazing food, and like usual, the food created some some water waste and sometimes some leftovers. This would need to be dealt with, including draining the water and dishwater, which Leave No Trace recommends doing through some kind of sieve or filter. And of course, you pack out any leftovers. I don't think Mark had any leftovers. What he did have was this steel veggie steamer, which he wore on his head for a while. Of course, it was the perfect solution for filtering out any leftovers or water and dishwater. So it came in handy again later that night when we used it as a fire pot for a Leave No Trace fire. So we had a great time thinking up innovative ways to have a Leave No Trace fire, as you can tell. And again, a bit of a closer, better shot of the fire with the foil and the sand. On the Nahanni and the Wind River, we took a metal garbage can lid and it worked really well. It just makes, I would say, just make sure that you use lots of sand. Otherwise, in a bigger fire, you burn through that foil or metal. So we're almost at the end of this trip, but we had one more fun activity. Mike directed us to a last surprise that had us end on a high note. We get to collect river bugs. So what you do is you kick up the rocks in the river and it kicks up all these river bugs, and you use a screen to capture all the invertebrates. And then we can sift through them and identify them. We use this handy dandy cheat sheet of a chart of what the invertebrates are. It was fascinating to learn about them and to discover the many types. In fact, invertebrates indicate the health of fast flowing streams and rivers because they feed off of the nutrients in the water. So this part actually comes in later too as part of the citizen science presentation. And using an ice cube tray and a little scope, we were able to really see them up close and make out their tiny features. They're also different and cool, and it's a very fun activity for kids and adults alike. Adults are just being kids, right? And of course, we put them back after. So this is our group at the Horberg Takeout, and we had such a good time. Oh, but wait, we actually missed a principle. Does anybody know, and can you put in the chat what the principle is that we missed? And I'll give you a second. So and I'll say a few words about Leave No Trace. Some people wonder, what is the actual point of trying to put into practice Leave No Trace when we have huge environmental issues in the world? I used to be on the board of directors for Leave No Trace Canada, and people even wrote in or emailed regarding this. So I think the main concern or thing is about practicing Leave No Trace while recreating in nature and connecting with each other. people become more aware of the ways that they have an impact, and that can translate back into other areas of their life. Therefore, Leave No Trace grows this conservation collective consciousness that we really need right now. And again, the idea of what if one person does it and what if we all do it? This applies to making a positive difference just as much as it does to the impacts that even recreationists have, especially now that we are seeing more and more of us on the land and on the water. So I'll take a couple of questions before moving on to the next section, clean, drain, dry. Does anybody have any questions in the chat, Jim or Devin?
We don't see any questions right now. If anyone has some. Oh, here's a question. What's the function of the aluminum foil under the fire pit?
That's a really good question. The trip was a number of years ago, and although I do practice these principles, I forget all of the underlying reasons. And I think the aluminum foil just creates that barrier between the fire and of course, the sand on top of the foil. And I think you can spread it out. And yeah, I think it just makes that extra barrier for the fact that there won't be a scar left after the fire's out. It kind of delineates the fire too and where it will be. Sometimes there's no sand, so there is that too. Any other questions?
Tina, we'd like to thank you for the detail you gave on human waste. We were looking forward to that.
No problem. I'll let it be known that I forgot toilet paper on my Nahanni trip, and I had to use wipes, and I only had so many. So when you think about it, that is really conservation of the resource, but I just made them last. All right, well, yeah, go ahead.
We have a couple more questions for you. So here's one from Tiffany. After you've checked the rules of where you're going, is it legal to have a fire? If it's legal to have a fire, are you just recommending to dismantle the fire ring before you leave if you have one?
If you've made one, which is not recommended, then definitely disassemble it. But if you're more likely to come across, especially in Alberta, come across fire rings that are already made, and then you want to disassemble those. If you're going to have a fire, we recommend that you have it in a designated fire pit. So that'll be obvious because it'll be part of a campsite, right? So yeah, whenever possible, do that. And again, good point that it should be as long as it's legal to have a fire. So check your fire ban notices and right up until the day you leave.
We have another question from Hugh. He's wondering how camping in high use areas would differ from a wilderness northern trip.
Oh, well, whew, that's a big, I think that's a complex question. In terms of Leave No Trace specifically, I think you want to practice more stringent, I mean, this is subjective too, but more stringent Leave No Trace in the remote areas, because there may not be, like I know when I did the Nahanni and the Wind Rivers, there may not have been the infrastructure. So that's to be considered, like what are the campsites like, or are there even any campsites or infrastructure? And then you plan accordingly. So you might even want to take like a porta potty that the group would use, and you would actually take out your waste. Or like I said, what we did on our northern trips is really burying it away from the river. And I mean, other things can come into play too. But, you know, I think the difference is picture whether there's infrastructure or not, and really do your research, because that trip might have specific things that they tell you right in the main website about it. So in the Nahanni, it was Parks Canada's guide that we were going by, and it had all the Leave No Trace suggestions in it as well. Good questions.
And we have one more from Ava. She's wondering if it's okay to collect insects inside the park, like for surveys and release.
Oh, well, if you release them, I know there used to be a big thing to do, collect and like press plants for like, you know, research purposes. But you know what, insects are a really important part of the ecosystem. And I think, yeah, generally we would say to leave them, you know, as is, to do what they do for our ecosystem. But it's interesting to learn about them. And we're going to do more of that in the next part too. So should we continue?
Yeah, let's move on, and then we can, if we didn't get to your question, feel free to ask it at the very end of Tina's talk.
Yeah, thanks. So we're going to move on to clean, drain, dry, which you may or may not have heard of. It is a protocol that is being used more and more to prevent invasive species in aquatic systems. So this is a lot to do with stuff we don't actually see a lot of yet, but it's present in some places, and it's making its way, and rather quickly. Invasive species are the second leading cause of habitat loss in the world. Our area is no exception. It's a very real threat to healthy water that we are used to enjoying. And this is just a classic picture of Rundle Mountain and Vermilion Lakes. And that is a water filter system right in our beautiful valley. So if you remember one thing when you're out paddling, read the signs at access points and really try to get in the habit. So this is Alberta Environment has posted, this information about clean, drain, and dry your gear. So really just take the time to read through and understand what it is trying to convey about the practices that we need to start to see. The first one you see there is clean. And it is looks like a boot, and it's about, even your boots and if you have, hopefully not, but felt boots when you fish, that can pick up a lot of tiny matter that we are all very concerned about. So it's about, really knowing what to do in this case of whatever touches the water, you need to clean, drain, and dry. Because we have things coming our way, maybe, that are really a threat to our systems. So aquatic invasive species, they first of all threaten native species. They affect biodiversity because they take over. They are often impossible to eradicate. They are often, native species are often kept in check by predators, parasites, pathogens, and competitors. But when they move to a different ecosystem, they don't have those same checks and balances. When transported to a new area, these things aren't present. So this gives invasive species to a new area an advantage over native species. And it makes it very difficult for them, if not impossible, to self-control in the environment. So as you can imagine, prevention and early detection is key to this. So how do you think that they can be introduced? There's transmission pathways that have been identified through research, but if you want to put a couple in the chat of what your thoughts are, that would be great and welcome. So both intentional and unintentional release of water or species into waterways is both to be considered. So for instance, when people, release their pet fish, goldfish, into waterways, and then they take over native fish and their environment. So there's that. And from research, again, it's clear that it's through boats and gear, through water recreationists of all types and kinds, and then construction equipment. I mean, things travel from city to, the country and back, and then, often very much further. But any kind of alteration to a waterway can make it vulnerable to a transmission of invasive species. So, and only, one mistake can really permanently affect areas. So, for instance, there is quagga and zebra mussels as examples of aquatic invasive species that are spreading throughout the western United States and eastern Canada, making it as far west as Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba. It is imperative that we prevent them from being introduced because they are virtually impossible to eradicate. These mussels attach themselves to watercraft and water-related gear. They're often called the aquatic hitchhikers. They can survive outside of water for up to 30 days. Unlike most people realize, one mussel can produce millions of microscopic eggs per year. They have no predators and filter nutrients from the water, and that kills off native species, especially fish. The province of Ontario alone spends roughly $22 million a year physically removing these mussels from water-related infrastructure. So, I mean, the cost is outrageous to try to, get rid of them or even just stay on top of it. And here's a map of the zebra and quagga mussels that are spreading across North America. But as you can see, Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan are still mussel-free. So that's a good thing. However, we do have whirling disease. In 2016, whirling disease was confirmed in fish from Johnson Lake in Banff. And this is the first occurrence of whirling disease in Canada. Whirling disease is caused by a parasite, and it causes skeletal deformations or deformities in the infected fish. So the disease can be like spread to other water bodies through spores in the mud, and whirling disease can survive in mud for up to 30 years. So these things are highly adapted to take over. So this disease is not harmful to humans or other mammals, but can have significant effects on native fish. Whirling disease can be spread by moving any of the following. So infected fish, alive or dead, infected worms, contaminated equipment, or contaminated water. A few days before whirling disease was detected in 2016 in Johnson Lake, I was actually walking around the lake, and I remember I saw a dead fish and I thought, how strange, maybe I should report it. Well, I didn't report it, but I should have. I was to learn soon why that fish was dead. Okay, so what is Parks Canada doing about this? So we do education and outreach. We actually have, and more regulations are coming. We do watercraft inspections, which are going to become mandatory for motorized watercraft this year. And we're going to have self-registering certification for non-motorized paddling, which I'll talk to you about. And then we're increasing monitoring, and we're coordinating with our regional counterparts as well to manage this. So why are watercraft inspections important? They're really effective because it's people to people. The inspectors showing boaters how to inspect their boats for themselves. And they explain why the inspection is critical to detect aquatic invasive species. Plus, they impress upon the boaters how the zebra and quagga mussels damage boats, ruin fishing opportunities, harm the environment, and impair the water infrastructure. So they really drive home the primary message to clean, drain, and dry, and explain why boaters need to do it each time they use their watercraft. And actually, you know, it's more complex with motorized boats, and they do tend to go like lots of places faster. And I think it's easier with like canoes and kayaks and paddle boards as well. So this is a map of the watercraft inspection stations that you need to stop in if you're traveling and you have any kind of watercraft. I would say, if in doubt, stop. And they're friendly people just trying to do the right thing and find out more and collect some data about what's going on with watercraft. So here we have just a picture just to let you know, we have in Banff and other national mountain parks this summer in Canada, we'll have self-certification at water access points. So canoes, kayaks, and stand-up boards that access our lakes and rivers. We don't have you know, many lakes that allow motorized watercrafts, but they're mandatory to be inspected, whereas the other ones are going to be voluntary, but you know, we want to collect the information. This is an example of a self-certification permit that's set up at these access points. You'll be able to fill out the top and bottom. The top is filled out and left at the self-certification station, and the bottom is for the paddler to keep with them. And it gives Parks Canada, again, all the data they need on the usage of like the waterways. And I guess a chance to sort of track back who was where when. So yeah, the whole thing is clean, drain, dry, all your gear that touches the water. So your dog, your kid, your boots, your fishing gear, everything needs to be cleaned at the site and drained if it's filled up with water, and dried for at least 24 hours before heading to a different waterway. This is a challenge, but we just need to get into the habit. So Jim is here giving an example of clean, dry, and drain, or clean, drain, and dry. And of course, it's, you know, both sides, including the inside. You want to get rid of the mud on the inside. Usually there's more there. Because as we said, mud can really like house some of these invasive species for a long time. The good news is you go home with clean gear, like right off the river. So Jim, how is that for you guys to try? You might be muted. That's okay. I'll keep going. Or do you want to say anything?
Yeah, that's great, Tina. And we certainly knew about this, but it's the right thing to do. And you pick a nice spot to land on that's durable, and you just do the cleaning right there and then. And it doesn't take long, and you just get into the habit, and it becomes normal almost immediately. Thank you for the guidance.
Yeah, I like how you incorporated a leave no trace in there too. That's great. Yeah, so it is really simple. It's clean, drain, dry. And how else you can help is by using maybe a couple different apps if you're interested. So, so at the top there's iNaturalist, which is wildlife and plant ID and recording. And again, it just contributes to the bigger sort of body of scientific knowledge of an area. And then there's the EDD Maps Alberta app, and that's for early detection of invasive species and then reporting it. So if you think you see an invasive species like a mussel or what's called dynamo, and the nickname is rock snot, you can add that to the app. And then My Catch, if you fish, you can actually submit your fish catches, and that all helps. Like all those platforms really help. So before we move on to the final segment here on citizen science, any questions in burning up the chat?
There was one good question here. Stephen was wondering if you need to use a cleaning product when cleaning out your gear.
Yeah, so the idea is to use you could use a little touch of like bleach. I know that means that that's going into the aquatics ecosystem, but ideally you're draining on a surface like Jim did on the rocks, and it's filtering through already, right? And ideally you're drying it for a while after. So you do not use soap or anything non-biodegradable. You can use a little bit of bleach, or I think it's called quat, and it's something that is similar to bleach but probably not as harsh. And I don't know if I would recommend using that on all your gear. Obviously it would be watered down, but it would be something that would kill a lot of things off. And ideally you just want to get that mud off. So I think that's what I would say about that, but I can also follow up and check on that and make sure I give you the right answer after.
There was one more question from Tiffany too. She's wondering, can the whirling disease that was found in Johnson Lake be eradicated, or will it now always be in the lake?
Oh. Actually, we think we've got it. So the staff have drained the lake at least twice, and they've electrofished all the fish out. And I think that, I don't know what else they've applied, but they are doing their darndest to try to eradicate the whirling disease. The unfortunate thing is we think it's like already in the Bow River, because all of our tributaries go down to the Bow River. So so in terms of, I know, fishing, sorry, just to back up, Johnson Lake is our busiest lake with people who come up from all over the world to recreate. And I remember that day I was there, I saw so many people on their stand-ups and in their kayaks, and the lake was full of people. And if you look at the license plates, they're all from everywhere. This was back before COVID. So it really does make sense that it might have been the first sort of hit as far as whirling disease making it there. So the idea is we think we've actually got it as far as that goes, but that's a very controlled lake. A lot of lakes are not, we can't drain and fix, right? So hopefully we're on top of it now. Good question. Done a lot of work around that. Okay, shall we do the final wrap up with citizen science? Okay, this is so exciting because I did my master's in citizen science. So citizen science has many forms and definitions, but it's mainly known as ways in which the public can participate in science, research, and monitoring. So wherever you paddle, there will be native species and some species at risk. And you can do some research about the ecosystem that you will be in, and you can observe, record, and report what you see in terms of flora and fauna. So along the Bow River, spring and fall, we monitor the harlequin duck, a species at risk and an indicator species. When present, the harlequins indicate high quality, cold, fast flowing water. I like to think of them as the first whitewater paddlers. They are the most graceful when they are in the big whitewater and in the tributaries and the Bow River, and they jet ferry, from one side of the river over to the other and over rapids. And they're just a joy to watch. Plus, they're just beautiful and easily recognizable. Of course, like many species, the males are the most colorful while the females are more camouflaged, but they all have the distinctive white spot on their cheeks, including the juveniles. Harlequin ducks migrate east and west. They spend the winters out on the west coast. They bond as pairs there, and then they return to where the females were born and raised along the Bow River in Banff. And they reproduce. They have a slow reproductive cycle. They can be vulnerable to habitat changes, whether man-made or natural. So for instance, when we had the massive flooding in the Bow River system in 2012, we were concerned about their survival rate. But they seem to have come through that. Their numbers have not decreased those years following. So that was really good to know, and that the fact that we had been doing that monitoring for a long time before. We also know from research in Jasper National Park that the presence of boats can really make the ducks change their behavior. So Jasper banned rafting on the rivers at sensitive times. In Banff, we promote respecting wildlife and giving them lots of space. Harlequin ducks feed on those invertebrate bugs in these rivers. So the fact that they exist along these riverways is a testament to the health of these aquatic systems. So back in 2006, as of every few years, a group of park staff, volunteers, and a bird bander come together to band juvenile harlequin ducks so that they can be tracked. Bird banding provides data that cannot otherwise be gained about the species, but it is kept to a minimum because it does stress out the ducks. It's done under a professional supervising so as to minimize the stress and the time it takes. So there's a really concrete plan. Everyone has roles, and sometimes it just comes down to luck, whether or not it is successful. Okay, here's a picture of one canoe club trip from Bow Waters Canoe Club. They're based in Calgary, but they frequently paddle out on the Bow River in lots of different sections and count harlequin ducks. And they report them to Parks Canada. And they've actually, shout out to Bow Waters, because they've done this for the past 15 years. So the purpose of having the canoes is we have people on the water, and they're able to look for the duck families and then corral them into the netting site. The juveniles can't fly yet, so they get caught up in the net. And the idea is to catch them, do the banding, get them back on the water and to their parents. So on the Bow River, just after Lake Louise Rapids, there's a channel that the canoes were able to corral 3 juveniles down where the net was set up. And all 3 were caught in the net. And then, of course, the trying to get them off the net, and then handling, weighing, measuring, and banding them took place as efficiently as possible. So the bander knows how to untangle the duck from the net, again with minimal stress, but of course it is still fairly stressful. Yeah, and at times we were asked to really help hands-on if they needed it, and at other times we were just asked to document the process. So here's one that was fairly badly tangled up, but we finally got it free. And once they were, free, that we began weighing them, banded them one at a time. Of course, the bird bander did that, but we were asked to help keep the other juveniles calm by wrapping them in a towel and holding on to them. And of course, we had to be very quiet as well, which was hard for me. So of course, this is one being weighed. And this is one getting a general health checkup and measurements. And there goes the band on the foot with a number. So if you do see a harlequin duck and it does have a band on the foot, try to, with a big scope, try to look at what number, because we'd really like to know. And then we had to get organized around releasing them together so that they would all stay together and find their mothers, which of course the mothers were really not far from this spot. And we got some last minute instructions. And then getting them, you know, to the edge of the channel of the river. And we were holding our breath and we set them free. So yeah, really fun, but also really some serious, you know, conservation science around species at risk and an indicator species. So I guess the example or the main point I'm providing here is find out more about the ecosystems you are going to, and is there a species you could report on? Keep in mind it might depend on the timing or the season. A really easy way to do this is, again, use iNaturalist and observe, record, and report the flora and the fauna that you see. You don't even have to know how to identify anything. If you take a good photo and you upload it, guess what? The app helps you actually identify it. And then when the online experts get a hold of your photo, they will also confirm the species. So it's really easy, and it's a great way to learn and contribute to science research and monitoring. Okay, so I'll take my little break, but everybody, you guys can write in the chat, what is one thing you would like to start to include in your paddling trips that would help with conservation? Because all you have to do is start with one. And again, you know, I can take some questions if there's time, Jim and Devin, or we can also follow up with people about questions and answers.
Well, Tina, what a fabulous talk. 3 great topics that increase our understanding of our responsibility, but also increase our enjoyment when we're out paddling. And I think we've got some time for a few more questions. And Dev, do you have anything? Or if anyone wants to raise their hand, if you know how to do that, or shake your hand at us, we'll identify you and pass on our questions. I noticed my daughter said that she really have to wash her dog every time she goes in the water. And I quickly
really
informed her in the chat, yes.
Okay, I took my dog out on the river yesterday and he was digging a big hole. And of course I had to try to put it all back, but you know, they get covered because they love being out there. They're just digging around and collecting every little thing. So yeah, hose down with the baler.
We do have one question for you, Tina. What would be the best of the 7 principles to start with if you could only do one?
Woo! They all work so well together. I am a big fan of plan ahead and prepare, but if you want to pick out of the rest, I would say minimizing campfire is a lot of, you cover a lot with that one. For one thing, I did try one night not to have a campfire and just to light a candle and just to go for a walk and look at the stars. And that's a whole different type of experience and just as interesting for me. So I recommend trying that. Try them all. And there's a spectrum, right? You can be a real purist and drink your own dishwater, which of course you don't want soap in, but some people do that. They drink their dishwater. But you can also just start and kind of just build on, you know, parts of the principles that, you know, you can integrate. Some people really, you know, figure out their packaging beforehand and they make sure that they don't have as much plastic. They use reusable, you know, containers for the most part. And then they actually, if they do have anything that's recyclable, they bring it back and they recycle it. Like they actually consider the life cycle of the canoe trip. And I would say that's a really good idea to think about. Like, for instance, if you take really good care of your gear, it's going to last you a long time. And that means less will be manufactured. And that's less, you know, impact on the environment as well. Although I will say that you want a few canoes, not just one.
Of course,
then you
Tina.
can pick and choose. You can pick and choose which canoe you need, and you don't have to like wait 24 hours to go paddling again.
Tina, that's great. And one thing I've been doing is thinking about where our put-ins and takeouts are, in particular the takeouts, to be sure it's a durable place and that you're not dragging your boats through mud just to get out of the river. And I'm sure that we can be smarter about doing that. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time. You're obviously a great speaker and passionate about your topics. And I think on behalf of all of us, we thank you for taking the time. And I hope you'll stay for the remainder of the show. And thank you. And let's give her a big clap. Let's show her what we think.
Thank you. That was fun. Thank you so much. And I'm hoping everybody's getting inspired to, yeah, just start with some things and go from there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, let's continue on. We've got, we asked for people to send in pictures of where they're paddling, and we will ask again for you to send in photos. And I know more of you will get paddling the deeper we get into the season. But here we've got one submitted by Sid Fraser from Canmore. She's got a new boat. She told me she took her old Hellman to the factory in Nelson, and they're refurbishing it for her. And she took the opportunity to buy another one while she was there. But it's a tiny little boat. I think it's called an Otter. And here she is surfing on the Kananaskis River yesterday. And so, doesn't that make you want to get out there? Let's see what other pictures we have. Oh, Hugh from Canmore. Look, he's showing off the manufacturer's name too. Bell Canoe. Do you want to say anything about that shot there, Hugh?
Well, that was done in the spring on the Bow River. You can see the ice on the side, and there was the logs that were, you could just sort of sneak through there with my little Bell Wildfire. It's been a great little boat, but you know, you can see how clear the water is. It's starting to get a little bit more milky on the Bow nowadays.
Great. And that was near Dead Man's Flats?
Yeah, between downstream from Canmore and towards Dead Man's.
And sometimes when I mention that part of the country, I think the Revenant had some of their scene shot just very close to that location.
Oh, really? Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting area. It's you know, there's lots of Harlequin ducks there this year, which is the first time we've seen that.
And is that a Tilly hat, Hugh?
Oh, yes, it is.
Very good. Well, thank you for sending that in.
Oh, you're welcome.
The next one, Chip Olver submitted this one. Notice how socially distant they are, standing for the picture. Chip, would you like to say a word about this shot that we got?
We've paddled this twice in the last 4 days, and you mentioned how much the water level had gone up, and also the clarity of the water is really starting to change. On Thursday, I think it was you see right through to the bottom, see everything right as you look through the water, and today you can see it starting to silt up. This is just a lovely paddle, and it's such a picturesque takeout.
Great, thank you, Chip. We look forward to more. Just 1 second. Let's see what we've got. Oh, what else we've got here? You know that I can't read whose shot that is. Canoe Lake in Algonquin. Can someone, Dev, can you see the name of that? My control panel is in the way.
Yeah, this is from Neil, who I think unfortunately just had to leave, so he just missed his picture. But this was Neil Miller's photo.
Two small boats there, a bit of snow coming down. Well, we've all had that. Thank you very much, Neil. And I think we have a few more. Here, Dev, this is one of yours. Please tell us about this one.
This was from our trip to Barons River 2 years ago now, at Big Moose Falls, I believe.
Yeah, that was a beautiful trip. And I know that we have a lot of people interested in canoe tripping in the group. That was what we heard last week. Now, Neil, another one from Neil. You know, out west here, we certainly drive to sites, and many of us have the opportunity to fly into backcountry situations. But to me, that seems pretty dreamy, getting a train to stop and pick you up or take you into the wilderness. And I think this one's on my bucket list. Is that the same two boats,
this one-
perhaps?
I think this one was also from Neil.
Okay. All right. Well, please send in your pictures. We'd love to see them, and you get a chance to talk a little bit about them. And in 2 weeks today, we're going to be welcoming an Alberta legend, Mark Lund, to the show. I think many of us here in Alberta have either taken lessons from Mark. I remember the training he gave me, or been on trips that he's been leading, or his group out of Edmonton have been leading. But I think very renowned for this guide for Alberta paddlers. And almost all of us have these books, and they're always part of our research. And Mark is going to talk about trip planning, the use of maps, Google, and guidebooks. And I'm looking forward to this. And any of you canoe trippers out there, please be on hand May 30th for this presentation. And I want to say I had a real honor this week. I was invited by Sandro, and Sandro's with us here today. Thanks for joining us again, Sandro. And he's a member of the Wilderness Canoe Association. And Sandro invited me to talk to his group about river canoeing in Alberta and beyond, because I added a few trips that were beyond Alberta. I gave this talk on Tuesday evening, and I think it was well received. And the Wilderness Canoe Association is just a terrific organization. And I wonder, Sandro, it might be putting you on the spot, but would you like to say a few words about your association? And Sandro is one of the leaders on the board of this prestigious organization. Go ahead, Sandro.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, we are based in Ontario. We have more or less 500 members. We organize around 50 trips a year for all Canada, from Ontario, Quebec, Barns Land, a little bit as well north of Alberta. Was a very special year this year because of the COVID, but yeah, so we have it's an excellent club to join. Thank you so much. It was a great presentation you did last week.
You're very kind, and they recorded the presentation just like we have tonight, and it'll be on the CanoeingLive website soon, as it will be on the Wilderness Canoeing Association. They've been in operation almost 45 years now. They produce something, or they own a website called Canadian Canoe Routes, and I think many of us have been on that doing research and maybe didn't know that they were the organization. They also produce
yeah, it's hard to see. Yes,
yeah.
we have a magazine we produce a magazine 4 times a year. We call Nostagen, where you publish like histories from different paddles they just sent for us, and we review and we publish. And as well, we own MyCCR. I think must be the biggest paddling website in Canada. We manage, and yeah, we are proud to support all the paddlers in Canada. That's why we support MyCCR.
Well, thank you, Sandro. I've joined the WCA, and I recommend it for your consideration as well.
Thank you.
Now, a few announcements as we're getting close to the bottom of the hour. Let's all actively follow the COVID protocols, in particular on our shuttles. I know that we're getting close to the end of this terrible situation, but we've got to keep running this race right till the end. So let's be very responsible about that. Also wanted to, I know Doug McCown's in the audience tonight, and he gave us that great speech on safety last week. His recording is on our website, and I've referred to it twice in the last week as I've been looking for some of those gems that Doug had, and Tina's will be up as well in the next few days. We recommend on May 30th, bring a friend with you. Pass on our link and an endorsement if you can to someone else, and let's grow this community a little bit. And please submit some photos. We like dumps as well. So if you've got some action shots of people in the water, we'll receive those as well. And Dev is going to send out an evaluation. Please let us know what you think and how we can improve our programming. We appreciate that. And one of the highlights last week was our Canoeing Live selfie. I know when I brought it up, there was some real strange looks on the Zoom gallery, but look at this group that was here last week. We had a pirate. I didn't recognize there was a pirate there until it was a little too late. But everyone there looking like they're having a good time, and we're going to do another selfie. And I'm going to, if you could unmute us all, please, Dev. We're going to just use canoeing. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, and then we'll all look very happy. Wave your hands a little bit. I've got a little canoeing sign too. Where is it? It doesn't show very well. 1, 2, 3, canoeing. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Canoeing! Well, thank you very much, everyone. And, you know, as you're leaving, feel free to stay for a few minutes to chat. We'll turn on all the microphones. But again, have a great week. Be safe. And as we say on Canoeing Live, see you on the water. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.